Hello, this is Dr.Mardis. I'm an independent cryptozoology investigator. I've appeared on several television programs and documentaries, as well as several newspaper articles. Primary focus of my research is reports of aquatic unknown animals. Cryptozoology has obviously been criticized because of some people's inability to follow the scientific method and too much reliance upon eyewitness testimonial evidence. However, there are a few marine biologists out there that do take this seriously, such as Charles Paxton. You have a handful of reports of these animals from experienced marine explorers, and you have a few carcasses that have washed up over the years that there is still controversy about, that may represent unknown animals, possible prehistoric survivors. As part of this research, the idea has been around for a long time that some of these unidentified animals may be survivals of animals that we know from the fossil record, which is normally referred to as the prehistoric survivor paradigm. In my own research looking into this question, I have looked into a lot of anomalies in the paleontology literature of claims of animals surviving beyond their presumed extinctions as ghost lineages. One of those cases involves a reputed Miocene-era ichthyosaur called Tangaroasaurus cockanuiensis from New Zealand. I have been asked to participate in a video about this particular case, and this is what I'm doing on this video. Thank you. This creature was seen off the coast of Brazil by two zoologists on a research cruise in December of 1905. A report about this animal was published in the Proceedings of the Zoological Society of London for the year 1906. It remains unidentified. This carcass of an unidentified animal was retrieved from the belly of a sperm whale near Vancouver, British Columbia in 1937. Though there has been much speculation that it may be simply the mutilated carcass of some kind of whale or shark, it was impressive enough that two marine biologists described it as a new species called Tangaroasaurus wilsei in 1995. The case remains unresolved. The physical remains are missing. All that is left are the photographs. This animal was seen by Navy pilot Marvin McCamus from the Alvin submersible in the tongue of the ocean of the Bahamas in August of 1965. It remains unexplained. I confirmed this incident by phone interview with Mr. McCamus in 1997 before his death in 2004. This carcass of a mutilated marine animal was brought up by a Japanese commercial fishing vessel called the Zuyo Maru in April of 1977. Because the carcass was rotten, it was thrown back overboard, but not before 5 photographs were taken of it and tissue samples were cut. A set of scientific papers reviewing all the evidence had the majority opinion of most of the scientists that it was simply the mutilated carcass of a basking shark, and the tissue samples seemed to suggest this as well. However, there were a small handful of scientists that gave the opinion that it could have been an unidentified reptile and that the body proportions did not match a basking shark. So there is some residue of evidence to suggest that this may have been a genuine unknown animal. Regarding Tangaroasaurus, I'm reading directly from Benham's 1935 paper entitled A Reptilian Jaw from Kakanui, South Island, New Zealand, in the Transactions of the Royal Society of New Zealand. The following is the opening paragraph of Benham's paper. I'm going to quote directly from it. It says, Dr. J.A. Thompson, in his paper on the gem gravels of Kakanui, after enumerating the fossil mollusca found in the blue clay, suggests that the bed belongs not to the Oamaru system, but to the Periora, and on page 491 states, a whale was also found, a phrase suggesting that something approaching an entire skeleton, or at least the skull, had been seen by him. At any rate, this sentence refers without doubt to the specimens about to be described, for Dr. Thompson's collections from Kakanui was handed over to the Otago University Museum in 1903, and amongst the other fossils is a jawbone, or rather fragments of a jaw containing teeth, as well as some broken isolated teeth. These specimens are labeled in Thompson's writing, Whale from Blue Clay, All-Day Bay, Kakanui. I had therefore placed them with other remains of fossil whales in the collection here, but when I came to study the material last year, while preparing a memoir on the extinct whales, it was at once apparent that this jaw and teeth do not belong to the cetacean, but are reptilian. Now, stepping away from the text, you have to put this in perspective. Ichthyosaurs are generally considered to have gone extinct 93 million years ago. This Tangaroasaurus, whatever it was or is, was found in deposits of late Miocene, late Oligocene, or early Miocene, which would put it roughly about 20 million years ago, which is some 70 million years after the ichthyosaurs are thought to have been extinct. Now, Benham's reason for thinking that Tangaroasaurus was a reptile was his contention that it was a mandible fragment with teeth consisting of two bones, and supposedly the reptiles have the double bones in the mandible, at least some of them do, and that was his reason for thinking it was a reptile, and his reason for plumbing for it being an ichthyosaur was the way the teeth were rooted in the jaw fragments. And now I'll go back to his text. But to illustrate what I'm talking about the two mandible fragments, here is the top image is Benham's figure from the paper from 1935, showing a furrow running across the side of the mandible, and below that is an illustration of an actual ichthyosaur specimen that shows the two-part mandible on ichthyosaurs, and it's an ichthyosaur called Nonopterygius enthekiodon. Now I'm going to go back to Benham's text. Okay, this is going back to Benham's original text in his paper. This is part 2 discussion. I regard the fragments as those of the mandibles of a reptile possessed of a long rostrum or snout. The portion A shows no sign of being composed of more than a single bone, and therefore must be near the anterior end and near the symphysis of the two mandibles. It has become separated from its fellow, no doubt during the excavation by Thompson, for of course, if the bones in the more posterior region are in contact right with the left, the same condition will hold in the anterior region as well. The fragment B I take as being near the skull, and consequently the two bones of which it is made up would be the dentary and either the splenial, which are in some fossil reptiles does appear on the outer surface, or the cerangular, which in ichthyosaurus extends forward for some distance from the base of the jaw. The obliquity of the groove and its height above the lower margin of the jaw suggests the latter, for the splenial is usually confined to a very narrow portion of the outer surface. Possibly again, this lower bone is the angular, which sometimes extends some little distance in front of the articular bone, as in Dimetrodon. From the fact that the mandible is composed of two bones, it is quite certain that it is not that of a cetacean, apart from the form of the teeth, which I know of no cetacean living or extinct which has teeth of the serrated character described above. In looking through what literature is available, Owen's oceanography and certain paleontological works, such as those of Pictet, Nicholson, Zeitel, all of whom copy Owen's figures, the volumes of the Paleontological Society, those of Paleontologica Indica, and other works, it seems at first that if one judged from the character of the tooth, it might be Megalosaurus bucklandi, or figure 7 of Paleosaurus platyodon. But below I give reasons against this identification. The tooth does not resemble any of the fossil reptiles described and figured by Hector as occurring in New Zealand. I have searched the Canadian fossil vertebrates and Owen's African reptiles without finding any tooth serrated as these teeth are, but it cannot be that of Megalosaurus, for in the first place, this genus does not range higher than the Wealden in England or rocks in India, which correspond to the upper chalk of Europe. In the second place, Megalosaurus has no rostrum, for as in other dinosaurs, the skull is short and compact. But the Kakanui skull was evidently produced into a long and narrow rostrum, such as occurs in the ichthyosaurs and in some of the crocodilia. It does not seem to be Ichthyosaurus, but in this genus, the teeth form a continuous series close together, and moreover they were set in an open groove without sockets. The tooth is smooth with a tumid root, usually stouter than the crown. The transverse section of the two mandibles in our fossil resembles closely the representation of a similar section across the mandibles of Ichthyosaurus intermedia, but the drawing of the external surface of the jaw shows it to be composed of several bones, angular, surangular, splenial, and dentary at the hinder end, and only the dentary anteriorly. Owen's figure of Ichthyosaurus longospinus indicates that in that species the teeth were socketed but closely placed. But in Ichthyosaurus tenuirostris, the teeth which were socketed, which are slender and of course unserrated, appears to be in groups of 3 or 4 separated by spaces. The absence of serrations and the fact that, with the sole exception of Ichthyosaurus longospinus, sockets were absent, seem to negative the association of the Kakanui fossil with this genus. The only other reptiles in which sockets exist are Plesiosauria, where the teeth are simple curved cones, Crocodilia, where the teeth are smooth, not curved, but upright, closely set along the jaw. Some of these, such as the living Gavialis and the extinct Maestriosaurus, have a long, narrow rostrum, but the latter is of Triassic age. The Dinosauria had deeply socketed teeth, but they are placed in an open alveolar groove, and these animals had no rostrum. A consideration of the various possibilities seems to converge in the Ichthyosauria, but if so, it is a new genus so far as the literature available here allows me to come to any conclusion. I have considered the possibility of the fragment being part of the upper jaw, showing the maxilla in either the nasal or the premaxilla, but the transverse sections seem to negative this. Part 3, decision. I suggest a name for the fragments, no doubt a hazardous proceeding, but it is necessary to have some label for the fossil, as it seems impossible to allot it to any known genus. I am informed by my colleague H.D. Skinner that the Maori name for the god of the waters is Tangaroa, so I suggest the title Tangaroasaurus for the genus and will name it specifically after the locality. Tangaroasaurus cockanuiensis, new genus, new species. An ichthyosaurid reptile with a long, narrow rostrum, bearing teeth at wide intervals apart. These are compressed cones with distinct serrations on the posterior or on both edges. The bases of the teeth are implanted in sockets of peculiar and irregular form in the proximal region, but in the more distal region of the base of the tooth, it's free in the alveolar groove. Locality, Alday Bay, Kakanui. Geological horizon, mid-tertiary. Okay, the next major development in the Tangaroasaurus case happened 7 years after Benham's paper. This is from a paper called Ichthyosaurostra from Central California by C.L. Camp. Journal of Paleontology, Volume 16, Number 3, May 1942. C.L. Camp was an ichthyosaur specialist. In his article it says, mention should be made of Tangaroasaurus cockanuiensis, recently described by Benham, 1935, from marine mid-tertiary beds of New Zealand. The author inclines to the view that this jaw is an ichthyosaurid reptile. It differs from ichthyosaurs and other reptiles, however, in the presence of closed roots on the teeth. The dental lingual ridges are massive and the internal canals are enclosed within their bases. The teeth have spiked carinae and are mostly set in sockets. This specimen is evidently a squalodontid cetacean. A cast of a tooth kindly sent by Sir William Benham confirms this, and Dr. Remington Kellogg believes the form to be a squalodont of an unidentified type. And for those of you who don't know, Remington Kellogg was a specialist on archaeocetes and other early types of whales. Okay, so it's important to note that Kellogg based his squalodontid whale identification on a cast of one of the teeth and didn't directly examine the jaw fragments, which was the basis of Benham's reptilian identity for Tangaroasaurus. So, since 1942, Tangaroasaurus has been tentatively identified as a squalodontid cetacean or shark-toothed dolphin. These were very primitive whales that were among the earliest to come out of the archaeocetes. One thing they have in common with the archaeocetes is heterodont teeth, which is teeth still differentiated into different types, like most land mammals, which would include incisors, premolars, and molars. In fact, the teeth of the early squalodontid whales is very similar to the teeth of the basilosaurid archaeocetes. What you're looking at here is a direct comparison of the teeth of the Tangaroasaurus with that of the molars of a squalodontid whale. And as you can see, there is some resemblance with the serrations. And I should note that the squalodontid whales are considered to be a sister group to the living platanistoid river dolphins that inhabit the freshwater rivers of India. But the modern Indian river dolphins have homodont teeth like most living cetaceans. It's also important to note that some squalodontid jaw fragments appear to have sutures or furrows that could explain the furrow you see on the Tangaroasaurus jaw fragments that make it look like it's made out of two bones. If you'll look at this upper illustration of jaw fragment of Prosqualodon, you'll see some marks along the side of the ramus or rostrum that seem to reinforce this idea. So that may be what's going on here. It's kind of ambiguous. Another factor that may be in play here is the convergence and coexistence alongside the squalodontid whales with convergently evolved tomostomine crocodiles, or false gharials. These are a group of crocodiles that were fish eaters like the living gharial. There's only one living species in India. They are believed to be related to the true gharials. And for an example of how much convergence there is between them, this bottom illustration, the top one shows a type of squalodontid whale relative called genus Y, which hasn't been formally described yet. And the bottom is a giant estuarine tomostomine crocodile called Gavialosuchus. Now the jawbones of these crocodiles was made up of multiple elements that were sutured together, the same elements you see in the lower jaw of an ichthyosaur. And Benham, in his 1935 paper, mentioned the way the teeth seemed to go into the jaws of Tangaroasaurus was also similar to these same types of crocodiles. So it's possible these jaw fragments may represent some kind of tomostomine crocodile as well. And this also plays into more evidence coming at the end of this video. Looking through the paleontology literature, trying to find an ichthyosaur with teeth that looked like those of Tangaroasaurus, the only match that came close that I was able to come up with was a 28-foot long macropredatory ichthyosaur from Nevada called Thalattoarchon. And if you'll look at the illustrations, the photographs across the top, you'll see its teeth and its cranium. And the drawings below that are all Tangaroasaurus. So you can see some of the similarity to some of the teeth to what are presumably malariform teeth of Tangarosaurus. That's about all I could say about the ichthyosaur idea, relative to Tangarosaurus anyway. Okay, so now we move forward from 1942, 36 years into the future, to 1978. This is the doctoral thesis of vertebrate paleontologist R. Ewan Fordyce from the University of Canterbury, New Zealand, 1978. His thesis is called The Morphology and Systematics of New Zealand Fossil Cetacea. And there's a subsection entitled A Redescription of the Early Miocene Squalodont, Tangaroasaurus cockanuiensis benham, 1935. And in the course of reading through this, we find out that the mandible fragments, which were used by Benham to assert that the animal was a reptile rather than a cetacean, have mysteriously vanished. Now I'm going to read the relevant portions of Fordyce's 1978 thesis. It says, in 1906, Thompson reported the discovery of a whale which later was designated the holotype of Tangaroasaurus cockanuiensis benham, 1935. Benham described it as a new genus and species of mid-tertiary ichthyosaurian reptile, but soon after its description, its identity as a squalodont was recognized. Camp, 1942. The holotype consisted of an incomplete rostrum, part of a mandible, and a number of isolated teeth, of which the whereabouts is unknown of all but 3 incomplete cheek tooth crowns and some root fragments. These fragments are described here, and they confirm the identity of Tangaroasaurus as a squalodont. Mandible. Benham's figure 2, my figure 76. Benham erroneously reversed the orientation of the inner and outer surfaces. The mandible is compressed laterally with a flat inner symphysial region. The laterally compressed D alveolus figured is inclined dorsally outwards. There is no evidence available to deny the status of Tangaroasaurus as a distinct longarostral squalodont genus of early Miocene age. The genus is based on a fragmentary holotype, most of which has been lost and which exhibits few quantifiable features or features currently recognized as of diagnostic importance. For this reason, the name Tangaroasaurus caucanuiensis must be used with caution until such time as its relationships can be determined better. Okay, after receiving his doctorate, Fordyce mentioned Tangaroasaurus in the paleontology literature proper. This is an article, R.U. and Fordyce, 1979, records of 2 Paleogene turtles and notes on other tertiary reptilian remains from New Zealand in the New Zealand Journal of Geology and Geophysics, number 22, volume 22, number 6. In this article, he states, Benham, 1935, described a specimen from Alday Bay, Caucanui, North Otago, as a new genus and species, Tangaroasaurus caucanuiensis, of mid-tertiary ichthyosaur. Previously, Thompson, 1906, who had discovered the specimen, identified it as a whale. Kellogg in Camp, 1942, Keyes, 1973, Marbles, 1949, and others have indicated that T. caucanuiensis is a cetacean, and a redescription of it is planned. Okay, now, jumping ahead to 1991, we have some interesting quotes from vertebrate paleontologist Christian de Muson at the Natural History Museum in Paris. He's a highly respected expert on fossil marine mammals. And this is a paper from 1991 entitled, A New Ziphidae Cetacean from the Early Miocene of Washington State, USA, and Phylogenetic Analysis of the Major Groups of Odontocetes. This is published in the Bulletin du Muséum National de Histoire Naturelle Paris, number 4. Now I'm going to go to his quotes. He states, Tangaroasaurus Benham, 1935, and Austrosqualodon Climo and Baker, 1972, are based upon mandible fragments and teeth, which are regarded as unsatisfactory specimens to define a cetacean, and consequently they must be regarded as incertae cetus. Prosqualodon shows the platonestoid synapomorphy of the scapula but lacks the other synapomorphies found in the Squalodontidae, circular fossa, palatine suture, rostrum morphology. Consequently, this genus is regarded as a plesion, sister group of all the other Platonistoidea. The fossils assigned to the genera such as Metasqualodon, Colophonodon, Saurocetus, Trirhizodon, Parasqualodon, Microcetus, Tangaroasaurus, and Austrosqualodon are too incomplete to be taken into account and must be regarded as Odontoceti incertae cetus. So Christian de Muson certainly seems to have cast doubt on the status of Tangaroasaurus as a shark-toothed dolphin. Look, going back to 1935, I would imagine that many of Benham's colleagues were very reluctant to entertain the ichthyosaur idea, seeing as the Miocene period was 70 million years after the presumed extinction of ichthyosaurs. So looking around with what they had to work with and the known animals that existed during the late Oligocene, early Miocene period, a shark-toothed dolphin would appear to have been the best fit. One interesting thing about the early whales, including the archaeocetes and the early squalodont whales, were that they had heterodont teeth that resembled the differentiated teeth of mammals, incisors, premolars, and molars. And looking here at this illustration in the upper left corner, looking at the teeth of Tangaroasaurus, it would appear that you had two distinct types of teeth, these incisor-looking teeth and these molariform-looking teeth that are missing roots. One of the signature features of these molars of these early whales is that they had double roots, as you can see on this bottom left illustration showing a molar of Squalodon calvertensis. You can see that unlike the incisor, the molar has double roots. Unfortunately, one of the problems with Tangaroasaurus is that the teeth that appear to be molariform are missing the roots. There's only crowns. And this illustration over on the right shows the incisors and molars of Dorodon, which is one of the short, smaller types of archaeocetes related to Basilosaurus, but much smaller and less elongated. So that's part of the problem with Tangaroasaurus, is the missing roots on the apparent molariform teeth. And as I mentioned earlier, there was one type of Triassic hypercarnivorous ichthyosaur from Nevada called Thalidoarchon that would seem to have teeth somewhat convergent with what you see on the different teeth of Tangaroasaurus, especially the molars. If you'll look at the photograph montage across the upper right, you'll see the teeth of Thalidoarchon, and you can see that there's a hint of serration on some of the molariform looking teeth from it, and the teeth on the extreme right appear to be somewhat a different shape from the ones on the left. Whether this is of any significance, I don't know, but it is worth noting. It's also interesting to note that the incisor-like tooth of Tangaroasaurus, with its long root, bears a superficial resemblance to the teeth of many Mesozoic marine reptiles. In this montage, going from the left-hand corner clockwise, you have the tooth of an ichthyosaur, the tooth of Tangaroasaurus, the tooth of a pliosaur, the tooth of a mosasaur, and the tooth of a long-necked plesiosaur. So you can obviously see the resemblance. Assuming that Tangaroasaurus is not a squalodont whale, for the sake of argument, there is no other marine mammal like a pinniped that has an elongated snout like that beyond some kind of long-snouted cetacean. The only alternative that I can think of from an animal that was contemporary with the shark-toothed dolphins are these Tomastomene crocodiles that I was mentioning earlier. And as you can compare the tooth of Tangaroasaurus on the left top with the teeth on the right, which are from a Tomastomene crocodile, you can see some resemblance. This image on the bottom right is the skull of a Tomastomene crocodile that was found on the other side of the world in the Mediterranean near the island of Malta at a place called Gozo. found with this very same crocodile skull was allegedly another Miocene ichthyosaur, which I'm about to discuss. This other case and Tangaroasaurus are the only alleged mid-tertiary or Paleogene ichthyosaurs that are known from the literature. Okay, this part of the video is about the other alleged Miocene ichthyosaur from Gozo, which has been given the scientific name Ichthyosaurus gaudensis. The original article about it appeared in the Quarterly Journal of the Geological Society, February 1st, 1871, number 27. It's an article called Notes on Some Reptilian Fossils from Gozo by J.W. Halke. Now, like Tangaroasaurus, this specimen consisted only of jaw fragments and some teeth, and was found in association with a Tomistoma crocodile that has been given the Latin name Tomistoma gaudensis. And the only figure that appears in the paper is a figure of one tooth, and you can see it right here on the screen. And now I'm going to go to the article. I'm going to skip the section about the crocodile just for purposes of brevity. So this is Note on Some Reptilian Fossils from Gozo by J.W. Halke. These fossils were collected by the late Captain Strickland and forwarded by Mrs. Strickland for examination and description to Mr. Busk, who entrusted me with them for this purpose, informing me at the same time that they came from Gozo, the Gara of Strabo, an island adjoining Malta, reputed Miocene. As one of the fossils indicates, I believe a new crocodile, and the other, if Gozo be really Miocene, if the jaw actually came thence, and if my determination should prove correct, shows the survival of an ichthyosaurus to a much later period than that of the upper white chalk, the most recent formation of which any remains of this genus have yet been found. They seem to me worthy of being brought under the notice of this society. Ichthyosaurus gaudensis. This fossil, which I venture to refer to the genus Ichthyosaurus, is a symphysial part of a long, slender mandible. The front end is wanting, and the rami have been broken off just behind the symphysis. In this present mutilated state, it measures 9 inches long, 12 transversely in front, and 21 at the posterior limit of the symphysis. Its outer surface is transversely, gently convex, smooth, and finely wrinkled longitudinally. The upper surface presents a smooth, narrow median tract in front, greatly convex transversely, behind slightly concave in the same direction, mesially divided by the symphysial suture, in which posteriorly the splenial element is discernible. This is bordered externally by a line of shallow tooth pits separated by low transverse ridges, the outer edges of which ascend a short distance by a low parapet formed by the slightly higher outer edge of the dentary bone. Most of the pits are empty, and their smooth surface shows the absence of any firmer bond of union than the gum between the teeth and the mandible. The teeth are conical, the crown is slightly compressed, its transverse section elliptical, the fang is simple, of a bulbous figure, its exterior is smooth, its base slightly contracted and rounded. The principal tissue is of simple tubular dentine in the crown covered by a thick enamel, while in the fang it is enveloped by a stout capsule of cementum. A pulp cavity rises from the fang for some distance from the crown. A minute plug of spar fills its upper end, and its lower end encloses a little mass of osteodentine which is continuous to the contracted basal end of the cavity with the external cementum. 21 teeth occupy a space of 8 inches. The length of a fang slightly exceeds 3 inches. The diameter, including the capsule, averages 3 inches, and that of the dentinal cylinder minus its investing capsule 15 inches. The apices of all the crowns are broken off so that the entire length of the tooth is not determinable. In their form and structure, these teeth repeat so closely the characters of those of the Chimeridge and Thechiodon as to suggest the great probability of their both belonging to the same genus. My note on Thechiodon communicated last session noticed the resemblance of its teeth and the mode of its attachment to the jaw of those of Ichthyosaurus. But my material was too imperfect to justify me in certainly referring it to that genus. I have now, however, indisputable evidence that it is a true Ichthyosaurus, and this being so, the similarity of the dental characters of this gozo mandible with those of Enthechiodon affords a strong presumption that it is also ichthyosaurian. Dr. Duncan suggests that the ichthyosaurian fossil might be derivative from some secondary rock. He mentioned that Dr. Leith Adams had once sent him an Aspidicus crustatus from the Hippurite limestone, which was stated to have come from Malta. To account for this, he suggests that the Miocene of Malta might have been supported on beds of Cretaceous age, and fossils from that source might have been embedded in the coral reefs of the later date. Captain Spratt expressed a doubt of the fossil having really come from Gozo. He did not recognize the Cretaceous-looking matrix as belonging to any of the rocks of that island, with all of which he was acquainted. The nearest approach to that kind of rock can be found in the lowest of the deposits near Cairo, which were probably Eocene. Professor T. Rupert Jones suggested an examination of the foraminifera in the matrix with the view of determining its secondary or tertiary age. He mentioned the occurrence of rolled nodules of older rocks in beds of later age at Gozo. Mr. Busk stated that a stone of similar character to the matrix occurred in Malta but not in Gozo, but probably in both. Mr. Holke in reply observed that he had in his paper intentionally left the stratigraphical part of the question untouched and confined himself to the paleontological aspects of the remains. So there's already a suggestion that this fossil might have been reworked from older sediments in the original paper, so bear that in mind. In a 1989 book called Pioneers of Maltese Geology, Maltese geologist George Zammit Maple expresses the opinion that Ichthyosaurus gaudensus was probably a mistaken identification of either crocodilian or cetacean jaw fragments and teeth. Okay, now I'm quoting from an article called Stratigraphic Evidence for the Extinction of Ichthyosaurs by a French ichthyosaur specialist named Nathalie Bardet. This is published in a journal called Terra Nova, Volume 4, 1992. And she states, fragmentary rostrum with teeth close to Nenopterygius and Thechiodon from the Miocene of Gozo in the Malta Islands, attributed by Holke 1871 to Ichthyosaurus gaudensus. Kuhn 1922 and Kuhn 1934 noted that the close affinities to Nenopterygius and Thechiodon. Kuhn referred this specimen to Nenopterygius gaudensus and the fact that the specimen had been recast from older rocks. If the specimen is really close to the Kimmeridgian species Nonaturigius Enthekiodon, its age is more probably at least Upper Jurassic. Okay. In a volume entitled Handbook of Paleoherpetology, Part 8, Ichthyopterygia, published in 2003 and co-authored by ichthyosaur specialists Christopher McGowan and Ryosuke Motani, it states, Ichthyosaurus gaudinsis hulki 1871. Hulki 1871 based this species on an isolated tooth from Gozo, an island next to Malta. Supposedly from the Miocene, this tooth is not ichthyosaurian and probably crocodilian. So in general, it seems the opinions on the identity of Ichthyosaurus gaudinsis seem to come down on two sides. Either it's genuinely an ichthyosaur reworked from older deposits, most likely Jurassic, or it is Miocene and it's not an ichthyosaur, most likely some kind of crocodile. Now, considering the fact that Hulki examined the Tomastoma gaudinsis skull at the same time that he examined the Ichthyosaurus gaudinsis fragments, I think it highly unlikely that if they were the same animal, he wouldn't have recognized that. But that's as far as I can take that argument. So, there you go. That's all the information I have. Thank you for listening.